The change that would mark Pokémon as an international company and lead them to become the current largest franchise in the world actually came from their least profitable generation. For that was the generation where they made the largest risks. And even though those games wouldn't sell as well, some of the changes these games introduced would be continued for each of their following games. I'm talking about Pokemon's 5th generation, namely Pokemon Black and White. These would be the first games that didn't take place in Japan, and while Japanese inspirations have always been and will continue to be in their designs, this generation would show the potential of these creatures representing a region's culture, history, and species, at least more apparently so than what they had in their first sets of designs. Gen 5's Unova was based off of the United States of America. And while the map is modeled after the New York metropolitan area, the Pokemon still came from a lot of cultures, considering how USA is a cultural melting pot. But some would still stand out as noticeably American, which was pretty new for this franchise. These games would also make a very bold move to bar all previous Pokemon from the story, until the post-game. While this was unpopular at the time, this meant that Black and White needed to fill their main campaign with completely new creatures. This will lead to Gen 5 having the largest number of new Pokemon to this date, with a whopping 156 new Pokemon. 156? That's a suspiciously close number to 151, which was the number of Pokemon they had in the first generation. In fact, many fans have recognized how the roster of the Unova region can mirror that of Kanto's. Was the first roster perhaps a template to make these new Pokemon? If so, is there a Gen 5 counterpart to every Gen 1 Pokemon? I tried to fit this puzzle together over and over, but for my third attempt, I think I'm onto something. In this video, I wish to assert that instead of a one-to-one comparison, Gen 5 is rather the Deltarune to Gen 1's Undertale, where certain tropes and elements were mixed around to make these new characters. Don't worry, I'll be repeating this several times. Now for today especially, I'll be quoting a lot from Dr. Lava's translations of the Nintendo Dream interviews, so please follow Dr. Lava on Twitter and YouTube, and check out the direct links to their website in the description below. The only ethos that I have to offer is that I've been partaking in creature designs myself, as I've made my own collection of creatures based off of STEM topics over the past few years. For this video, I've just finished drawing every Gen 1 and Gen 5 Pokemon in this emoji style to explain my points today. The goal of this isn't to make a rigid template, but rather to make a fun list of ideas from which people should be free to be inspired by. So let's start pairing Pokemon's 1st and 5th generations. Let's start at the beginning. Oh, Unova's first Pokemon is Victini, while Kanto's last Pokemon is Mew. These guys are what the fans call mythicals. Legendaries and mythical Pokemon are special members of the roster that stand out, often with them being rare and being catchable only once per playthrough. The difference between legendaries and mythicals, though, is a matter of distribution. While legendary Pokemon can be consistently caught as long as you have the game, mythicals were often tied to an event. Even though the games could be hacked to reveal the mythical, the normal way of getting them was by participating in certain events and giveaways. Not only are these mythicals pretty stacked in their stats, but they will be further advertised as main characters in featured films or the anime, adding to the FOMO one might get if they miss the limited time event. As opposed to Mew being the only Gen 1 mythical, Gen 5 had many of them. And honestly, if we take away the legendaries and mythicals of both regions, Gen 5 does end up having fewer Pokemon than Gen 1 did. Now speaking for current day, with the waning interest in the movies, we have seen a quiet retirement of mythicals, as some of these Pokemon can now be regularly caught if you buy a DLC. But we can't go too deep with every element here, or else this video would take way too long. We'll revisit how legendaries have been treated later, but for now, let's just go on and knock out the early game.
I choose you!
A triplet of Pokemon lines to choose from. Most mainline games follow this, but Gen 5 is arguably the first time they have this twink chat grill model. Wait, would I get in trouble for that? I guess their trope is properly called two guys and a girl, where here the human definition of femininity and masculinity were applied to these designs. I'm saying human definition because other species got their own standards. It's important to note that this doesn't mean that every Samurott is a certain gender, because every starter has a male majority due to the game mechanics. The increasingly humanoid elements have been a point of contention amongst fans, where some prefer the less human-like layouts of the past, while some are now growing up with these partners as their best friend. The 2011 interview mentions how the designers have always tried to make the 3 starters cool, serious, and funny, and we've arguably already had a feminine design before, but the direct inspiration of these starters were from specific humans. And yeah, we'll see all the starters consistently become more humanoid for a while. Maybe the real problem was that all the starters were becoming more humanoid, which was why many found Skeletors to be a breath of fresh air.
Metamorphosis.
Pokemon's roster is often propped up to encourage making decisions. Not only do you have to choose which version of the game you want to buy, but you also have to choose which Pokemon would be in your active team. None of these bugs were version exclusives, but they were available at similar points of the game. Unless you're Bugcatcher Joey, you'll probably only have one of these bugs active in your team. Gen 1's bugs established a trope where these bugs were found early in the game, offering something that grows up quickly unless you get past the earlier sections. However, unlike the early bugs of many other generations, Gen 5's bugs appear a bit later in the game, only copying the format, not necessarily the function. What's up with the format anyways? Why do they all have 3 stages? I'll be showing images of bugs for the rest of this section, so look away if you wish to. The 3 stages reflect real-life metamorphosis. Pokemon's evolution has a different meaning from evolution in our world, where Pokemon's definition is more like just growing up. Many insects go under complete metamorphosis, which is also called holometabolism. But yes, this involves 3 stages of larva, pupa, and adult. I mean, I guess it starts with the egg, but shut up. The drastic changes through the animal's life cycle can be expressed by different designs. However, not all insects go through holometabolism. Like, leaf bugs and pill bugs only go through incomplete metamorphosis. But it's still neat to see those Unovan Pokemon try to imitate a pupa stage, where the middle stage looks more defensive.
Bird up!
Unlike bugs, birds don't usually have 3 distinct stages in their life cycle, but somehow Gen 1 had 3 stages for their bird. So some generations have 3 stages, others have 2 stages for the bird in their early routes. A lot of these early creatures are familiar animals like dogs and cats, possibly to ease the player into the world. But in the cases where birds do have 3 stages, they would often hop different species to make the stages actually look distinct. And here in Gen 5, they went from a dove to a pheasant.
We're the rats.
When looking across multiple generations, there's a shared small mammal trope, and these generations are no exception, with a Raticate rat and a Watchog groundhog. Again, these early areas are filled with animals a general person would recognize, before pulling out the weird stuff to surprise them. Though, many people did find Patrat weird already.
That bird that I hate.
Okay, this is the first Gen 1 Pokemon that probably doesn't have a direct counterpart. If anyone, I guess the closest to Fearow is the Mandibuzz line, based off of vibes, but nah. Can't really figure out what Fearow stands for. I guess they antagonized the protag in the anime. Are they supposed to be like Pikachu's natural predator? But they're weak to Pikachu. I do want to note that Gen 1 has a lot of birds, perhaps due to how they considered making a whole bird type, as that is an artifact of how creatures were categorized in older games, which were usually as taxonomical families, like the Slime family, Undead family, Bug family, Dragon family.
Alright, I can see that I will have to teach you how to be villains.
The common guard has to have some creature to fight you with, right? Arbok and the poison type would exemplify the villain types in the first generation in anime, but by the time dark type was introduced, this shifted more into a dark nurse role.
It's Pikachu!
The Pika clone is one of the more documented and intentional tropes of the franchise, where ever since Gen 3, there was a line of Pokemon that suspiciously were electric type and had them electric cheeks. Though Gen 3 had twins, Gens 4 through 8 would play it out pretty consistently with just having a single stage Pokemon that either convergently or divergently had the Pikachu cheeks. Gen 5 did kick off the trend of making these Pika clones not just pure electric type, adding a question of what a Pika clone would look like for every type. However, at this rate, we're going to need 12 more generations to see every type combo.
I eat dirt.
So this is not a trope. I want to make it clear that most of these elements are shared only between Gens 1 and 5, because Unova has seemingly considered Kanto's decks to fill out the 150 plus characters of their roster, while no generation is even close to that number. I ended up pairing these two near the end of doing my matches due to the overlapping types as the last resort. And I guess they're both relatively early game. As a conspiracy theory, I do want to note that Team Rocket's Giovanni in Gen 1 was a ground specialist before Yellow's revision, and there's suspiciously a ground dark type for Team Plasma to use consistently. Is it a reference to Giovanni? Well, that's just a theory.
Are we all gender?
Alright, so there are several contenders here on the Unova side, but hear me out. Gen 1 Pokemon didn't have the cleanest way to represent sexual dimorphism, with the different forms being different Pokemon numbers. In Gen 4, sexual dimorphism was retroactively given to a lot of older Pokemon, but a lot of them were pretty trivial. The franchise wouldn't do this ever again. But Gen 4 also had new Pokemon of the time like Combi and Hippopotas that had noticeably different textures between the sexes, without changing the Pokemon's entry number. So Gen 5 would solidify how sexual dimorphism would be represented going forward, as only a few Pokemon would have a different design depending on the sex without bloating up the dex number. However, there are a few lines of Pokemon who are classified as separate species, but they're treated as gender counterparts due to the shared base stats and mirrored ratios. Thus I'm counting Braviary and Mandibuzz with the Nidos, who due to unsolidified conventions were considered to be separate species.
He's so fluffy, I'm gonna die!
When I made these comparisons, I did so before rereading Dr. Lava's translated interviews, so I felt validated when I saw that Pokemon art director Ken Sugimori stated that Minccino was the Clefairy of Gen 5. Is this confirming that Gen 5 was a parallel to Gen 1's roster? Anyways, Minccino is often mistaken to be the early Mabble of Gen 5, but they kind of appear later in the game. Coincidentally, Minccino and Clefairy both need a stone to evolve, where the stone evolutions shake up the normal playthrough by requiring some exploration of the area. But even without considering the gameplay, a great deal with Pokemon's success is most likely due to their range of creature designs, satisfying more fans with different preferences. And here, we can see a slot that requires making at least one cute design.
Firefox. Firefox? What the f-
Okay, listen. I know that Ninetales is based off of the Asian fox spirit. There are multiple Asian cultures that speak of a nine-tailed fox that can transform into people. And I know that Zoroark is a reference to that latter part as a fox that can disguise themselves. However, I think Zoroark fits another Pokemon down the line, whilst this fire spirit can be related to another fire-type cultural design, Darmanitan, based off of the Japanese Buddhist Daruma dolls. This one's probably much more of a coincidence, just like how they would both get Ice-type regionals, but it's pretty evident that the designers were often concerned about having enough of every type as they can't rely on any past Pokemon to fill the area. Now, it's not mentioned that Darmanitan was ordered to be a fire type, but this pair ended up being a fun prompt. And my main goal today is to share a cool list of ideas with you, cause these matchups cannot be one-to-one. We're just having fun here.
You don't love me!
I promise these are gonna get better soon. If I wanted to label Jiggly's role in the roster, I guess they're kinda like a second Cutie Patootie, mirroring Clefable's line. And the closest thing I can think of in Unova is Mana and their Moonstone evolution Musharna. Musharna has a much better comparison later down the road, but remember it's not a one-to-one, these elements are just scrambled and shared in this analysis. Speaking of Moonstone evolutions, in Gen 1, I feel like every Moonstone evolution made the Pokemon look more like a rabbit. Like there is this East Asian and Native American myth of the rabbit on the moon. It's funny if that's the reference, though I don't think they bonify the later Pokemon.
He ran right in front of my truck.
Now before I get into the more obvious comparisons, let's talk about the Misfit Unovan that introduces a pretty cool element that I wanted to include on the list. I know, it's kinda cheating, but the Deerline was explicitly mentioned to showcase the new game's season mechanic. And I think it's pretty cool to make a design in order to flex the new gameplay that you have. Understandably, this element couldn't really exist in Gen 1 because what even is the new mechanic of a first game? Like, you have to establish a convention before twisting it. But with that out of the way, let's finally get into some of the more apparent comparisons.
No, I mean, you're a bat.
This is not a trope. There are only like 3 lines of bats in the whole franchise, but this video is talking about shared elements between Gens 1 and 5 specifically, and they both got bats. It's an easy mon to fill the caves with. We'll see the same with another animal later on this list, But before we move on, I want to note that Gen 1 has had some additions by the time Gen 5 rolled out, so some of these parallels sometimes consider these additions, while some don't. Swoobat here is an example of when those additions weren't reflected. Even though Victory Bell shows up way later on this list, I'll bring it up now. Vileplume and Victory Bell were version exclusives, and Whimsicott and Lilligant were sort of version exclusives, though there was an in-game trade to get one or the other. Pokemon has this unique business strategy of selling the same game twice simultaneously, meaning that you need to have friends or double the money to complete the decks. It's been a gimmick of theirs from the get-go, and what could I say? It worked, as these versions of the games would try to be balanced so that there's no clear winner to get one version over the other. I also want to note that Whimsicott is a pure grass type in this game because the fairy type wasn't introduced until after Gen 5. So these really were pairs of plants that had the same typings.
I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
Unlike the other pairs I've mentioned so far, Parasect and Venomoth aren't really a pair at all. Neither would I say Croissant and Galvantula are either. But it just so happened that both dexes had a bunch of bugs, and with these two stagers, one was more physically capable in their stats, while the other had better special stats. Even if this correlation wasn't intentional, it's interesting to note how making designs for a game calls for not only a variety of visuals for various tastes, but also a variety in gameplay, such as having a tankier design or a more nimble one. Yeah, just like the Bastron before, there really aren't any other moles in Pokemon, so this is not a trope, just a shared element. The moles could populate the cavernous areas of the games, just like the bats did, as moles are closely related to the earthen element. Alright, cats. Honestly, I might as well also bring up dogs. These are mammals that many humans are familiar with. And whilst feline and canine creatures can ease the players into the fictional world, it's kinda hard to make a cat monster that doesn't just look like a cat. I feel like some Pokemon themselves have kind of been labeled as just a dog, because no matter how many breeds they mixed into the design, real life breeds can be even more messed up. I believe this is why several of these designs make the creature stand up. Like, that's an easy way to break up the silhouette for people to realize that this is not just a cat or dog. No, this is a guy who could stand in line to vote for the next primaries. But seriously, unless the body plan is changed in some major way, the Pokemon can end up looking just like that regular cat or dog, just with different colors or accessories. And even though different colorations may have fooled some people in the past, I don't know if that would fly in this day of age. I personally think the best cat-dog Pokemon that don't look just like a cat or a specific dog are probably the legendary beast of the second generation. Like, even though Raikou is probably a saber-toothed tiger, their elemental powers are so much in the forefront that it makes them feel like a beast rather than a newly found crossbreed. I don't know. This was something I remember coming across when I was making canine and feline creatures for my own independent project, so I wanted to exaggerate parts and bring out their elemental powers so that they don't look just like a regular dog or cat.
A duck walked up to eliminate.
It's another species connection. Now you might be arguing that Ducklet is more of a Magikarp situation, where it's literally the story of an ugly Duckling. However, Ducklet doesn't play like Magikarp. The ugly Magikarp is accentuated by how they could only splash or tackle, making their evolution grind much harder than that of anyone else. Ducklet might have a higher level requirement, but in the context of Gen 5, where level requirements were notoriously high, another Pokemon would fit better with Magikarp. Also, Ducklet learns other moves, so yeah, I'm going with the animal comparison.
But I don't want to hurt nobody.
Well, that's too bad, kid, because you're gonna hurt everybody.
In a previous list, I would think that Darmanitan and Primeape would be a pair, but in this third revision, I think Mienshao fits better. Again, they can't rely on past generations to populate certain types, so these type requirements may have helped ensure that each type is being well represented in the region. I'll take this time to mention how I found Pokemon's fighting type to be pretty restrictive, as most of the body plans until recently were pretty humanoid to represent the different martial arts and fighting techniques. I say recently because generations 8 and 9 offer some fighting types to break this mold, as the element can represent war and lawn ornaments. People say that Flamico's body looks like a fighting glove, but I feel like people only say that because it's labeled as a fighting type. At least I don't see it.
Faggy?
So another great representation of metamorphosis comes from frogs, where they look drastically different from their tadpole stage. I'll be showing some real life frog images, so look away if you want to because some of these frogs show off their internal organs. Okay, frog images go. A lot of Gen 1 Pokemon are just cool real life animal, plant, fungus, but as a cartoon, regardless of them being native to Japan or not. Like the Poliwag line where some tadpoles show their intestine in the spiral pattern. Some sources say that this is about the glass frog, but it seems like all sorts of other tadpoles show off their intestines. However, the Poliwrath line just runs with the spiral design for all three of their stages, while Seismitoad, Wug. You know, warts and all, they actually represent real-life Unuras better, as tadpoles usually grow their legs first before their arms and losing their tail. Designer Ken Sugimori mentioned that they wanted this line to represent the frog better. Some mention how Seismitoad looks like a Suriname frog who has eggs hatched from their back, but in the interview he instead mentions the Japanese common toad. There are a lot more interesting details in the interview, so please do check out Dr. Lava's channel and website for the full translations. Actually, before this one, let's talk about one of the more obvious parallels.
What the rock is cooking?
In the first games, Pokemon was trying to get people to trade with their Game Boys, and to further incentivize this, some Pokemon had to be traded to evolve. To make this work out, there was usually an even number of Pokemon that had trade requirements that were split amongst the two versions. One such trade evolution was between Machoke and Graveler. There's a theory that the trait jumbles their features, giving Machamp more arms and Golem a lizard face. But this theory doesn't hold up for later trait evolutions, like in Gen 5 between Conkeldurr and Gigalith. But the parallel is just so blatant here. Again, this isn't a trope. Only Gen 1 and 5 do this. However, a 3-stage rock monster has appeared here and there in other games. So I suppose they're a fun idea in general. I did not think this would be so controversial. So Gen 1 had 4 trait evolutions, and the remaining 2 are Alakazam and Gengar. They weren't version exclusives, and they didn't share total base stats until Gen 6, but many trait evolutions come in pairs, so that you and your trading partner actually have a specific Pokemon to trade and achieve their evolution. Including Unova, as the only other trading pair we haven't talked about is Carablast and Shelmet, and trust me, they fit so much better with someone else down the line. So thematically, I always thought Alakazam's counterpart here was Gothitelle, as a humanoid psychic user. Some say Reuniclus because of Magic Guard, and good point, but both Reuniclus and Gothitelle are version exclusives. They are an established pair. Out of everyone else in the list, I thought these obviously fit the shape languages of Alakazam and Gengar as a nerd and an orb, especially if we look at Ghastly and Solosis. Now, I'll later mention that Solosis' line also has the slime element that Muk has, but again, it's such a strong pair with Gothitelle that it felt better placing them here. My previous iterations had Chandelure be paired with Gengar, and while I'm sure there are some shared elements between Chandelure and Gengar, that line will come in clutch later in this video. Trust me, the pieces will fall in place. When it comes to aquatic creatures, the basic animal one might think of is the fish. But there's so much aquatic life that aren't just fish. Tentacruel is arguably a squid, arguably a Portuguese man-o'-war, and Jellicent are jellyfish, to go butt wild with various non-fish aquatic life.
Peter, the horse is here.
Just like how cats and dogs were recognizable, we got equines as an easy creature to understand. I guess their manes can be easily used to represent their element, making them feel more special than looking just like the animal they're referencing.
This is mine.
It's probably a coincidence that both of these symbioses deal with shells. Slowpoke evolves by gaining a shell, and so does Carablast, while those shells are directly from another line, namely Shelder and Shelmet. Now, Cloysterine and Selgor look nothing alike, but I think this serves as a cool relationship that helps nail in the fact that this is a living world as the species interact with each other. I mean, having flavor text is one thing, but to have the design boldly depict this is another. I don't know how mutualistic Slowbro's situation is. They're probably both benefiting so people won't feel bad. But Carablast and Shelmet might be leaning into parasitism because Carablast definitely benefits while Shelmet loses their home. I should note that while Slowbro's shell is supposedly a Shelder, you don't need a Shelder to evolve them. It's just a regular level requirement. 3-stage Steel-type object mons. Now I do want to bring up a conspiracy here. See, every time someone brings up how object mons existed from the beginning, they bring up Voltorb or Magnemite, and recently Grimer, which is kinda new to me. While they are inanimate objects, they have rather obvious fantasy parallels with the Mimic and Slime, and even the recurring rock monster, which most people wouldn't even call an object mon. And it made me wonder if Magnemite also has a fantasy reference, specifically a winged eyeball using magnets to fly instead of wings. Now I do think this is a coincidence, because I did some digging and it seems that it started as an order from Pokemon founder Satoshi Tajiri to make a magnet Pokemon. The interview doesn't go into how Magnemite was designed, but it does note how Pokemon was coming out from a generation filled with fantasy games. They claim to be part of a counterculture, though that doesn't bar any influence they may have had at the time.
Those are some angry birds.
The interview mentioned how there are too many birds in Unova, but there were a lot of birds in Gen 1 as well. Again, it might be that bird type speaking from the grave. But these single stages are interesting finds in the latter parts of the game. I guess one way of looking at it is that you don't have the time to raise all of your creatures before the champion fight. Single stagers come in all shapes and sizes, and I'm not talking about legends and mythicals. Some single stagers are strong hitters, some are annoying obstacles, and many others are just populating the world, regardless of their competitive capabilities. Farfetch'd comes from a Japanese saying, and Sigilyph comes from a Native American glyph. I guess they both have elements from specific cultures, but I think that's just another coincidence. Okay, so no one Unovan is a clean counterpart to Dodrio, but their multi-headed element is shown across many of the Unova Pokemon. I guess the closest is Vanillix out of Process of Elimination, but again, this is not a one-to-one, but rather a scramble of specific elements that not every generation even shares. But I'd like to revisit Vanillix for a different line later.
Well, this sucks.
Yeah, just like how there were extra fighting types, here's the extra ice types. Like, the cold element has been quite hard to make creatures in my personal experience, just because the cold seems so locked to a certain climate. Maybe I should think of some cryotypes that don't just live in the cold. Okay, hot take incoming. I don't think Garbodor is just a direct pair with Muck, and instead I want to pair it with Wheezing. I'm calling them the pollution element. Personally, I feel like Muck is a fantasy slime creature, and while Garbodor kinda gives off slime vibes, I find it more as a form of pollution like Wheezing is. But, of course, it's most likely a combination. But I find the prompts pollution and slime more interesting than just saying that there are extra poison types. I kinda have an answer for this, even though I didn't assign a Unovan to Onix personally. Onix is known to be the first boss battle, right? The ace of the first gym. And the Unovan monkeys were made just for that purpose. Though I do feel like the monkeys kinda parallel someone else. So we'll talk more about them later. Somehow both generations had a sleepy tapir, both based off of the Baku, a Japanese myth of a creature that can eat dreams. So this is an example I tell to any artist out there that just because someone has done something similar to what you wanted to make, you can find a different take on the same concept and have a unique design of your own. Pokemon did this even in their very first generation, and again here with the Bakus. So yeah, you could definitely find a way.
Oh yeah, Mr. Krabs!
Yeah, this is probably Crustle again, but you know, I already assigned Crustle to Parasect. I don't think there's any other Unovan that represents Kingler more. And that's alright. Not only are there more Pokemon barring legendaries in Gen 1, but there are more distinct families as well. Don't worry, our goal here today is to make a fun list anyways, and crustaceans are fun! So these work in Pokemon games specifically because the items in the game look like Pokeballs. In any other context, they wouldn't function as traps. This is great not only for world building, but also as a game mechanic. It's funny, it's sus, it's everything you ever need.
Curse you, magic beans!
Execute aren't just eggs, but they're seeds. I think. They're grass type at least. The only other remarkable feature they have is the multi-headedness. And though Ferroseed doesn't have that, they are a seed to represent the grass type. So in a roundabout way, this element is about having extra grass types, but there's just multiple stages of a plant's life cycle to pick a design from. Like in this case, it will be seeds. I swear we have yet to see a proper flower cycle Pokemon with the bud, flower, and fruit stages. I guess the closest is Roserade, but it's like right there, man. Come on!
You're in for a scare.
So there was only one line of ghosts in Gen 1, as it was a special case just for the Gengar line. But the other quote-unquote ghost we meet is the ghost of Marowak in the spooky chapter of Lavender Town. Spooky is a vibe, and now that ghost types are definitely a well-populated type, Gen 5 can afford to have a ghost line fill in the spooky role with Cofagrigus. Look at them go! Ah yes, this is also an easy comparison. So it takes two to tango, and it takes two to fight, I guess. With the Hitmons being two different forms of boxing, sock and throw are different martial arts, whilst being from Unova. I mean, the United States is a melting pot of cultures, but Pokemon would never fully lock a generation to just the region the map is based off of. Lickitung is a yokai, I believe, the Akaname, but their design here is rather pretty silly. So I partnered them with Stunfisk, who also kinda looks pretty silly. Apparently Stunfisk's design was aiming to be the flattest Pokemon that no one ever was, and they ended up being a funny shape. That's cool. Again, Pokemon's success can probably be attributed to how they didn't just hyper-focus on being only cool or only cute, but having a variety. You don't have to like them all, it's just profitable for them to make something for everyone. Oh, I don't have a good excuse for this one. They're just both on the cool end of designs and were kinda left over when I was making my matches. They're also both ground type, but I don't know if that has to do with anything.
Medic!
Going from one of my least certain pairs to one of the most certain. Audino was specifically made for the anime to sub in as a Nurse Joy helper. Let's go! Yeah, Chansey being a healer is really unique amongst the roster of various fighters. There will be more kinds of supporting Pokemon by the time Gen 5 rolled around, but having a creature that helps the medical field is cute and adds to the world.
It's a piranha plant. What?
This is just a pair of single-stage grass typers. I don't think there's a deeper connection, but they're just pretty funny and whimsical. Tangela got an evolution later in Gen 4, and I wonder what the Maractus evolution would look like. Actually, it's a pretty good tangent. Gen 1 would later get a lot of new evolutions and pre-evolutions, and then even variants later down the line. And while a lot of these can be called Gen 1 pandering, Gen 1 does admittedly have a lot of creatures to choose and change from. Thus, we started to see a lot of Unovan love just merely due to the number of Pokemon that one could choose from. Conversely, we got fewer Sinnoh additions because a good chunk of the roster are already additions to older lines, often topping them off to 3 stages, which only leaves them open to the more recent gimmick forms and regionals, as they can't get new evolutions.
My blood! He punched out all my blood!
So I mentioned how single stages can come in all shapes and sizes, and this is a tough one. Okay, I don't know the competitive viability of either of these guys, and I also don't know how hard they are in a casual playthrough, but design alone, Druddigon fits as the tough-looking single stager to satisfy people who are looking for a cool, strong new addition for their team.
Girl, why you acting so cray-cray?
Okay, I think I'm off my rocker with this one. Haxorus was supposedly one of the first Unovans designed. I didn't know this when I assigned it to Horsey and Seadra. Hear me out. Horsey and Seadra are just another aquatic line in Gen 1, but in the sequel, they were given a dragon-type evolution. In fact, Kingdra was the second dragon-type ever. They weren't as strong as the powerhouse of Dragonite in the last set of games, but Kingdra was like a pseudo-powerhouse. Fans used to call these powerhouse Pokemon pseudo-legendary, so I want to call this the pseudo-pseudo element. Too many people think Haxorus is a pseudo-legendary just because of the dragon typing and having 3 stages, but their stats reveal how much of a fraud they are. And their level requirements? Ooh, level 48, how hard must it be to level you up? Editor, show Dino's level requirements.
My heart will go on under the sea.
In the pursuit of having unique creatures of various aquatic life, we actually don't have a normal fish yet. Turns out, Basculin wasn't a filler to pad the decks, but rather a filler to make the world make more sense. Aliens are a fun creature trope. They're extraterrestrials who travel the cosmos, only to be caught and treated like any other domestic animal. I know that Clefairy is implied to come from the moon, but Starmie also hints at being an alien. And Behemoth's line, wait, they crash landed 50 years ago? From 2010, that's 1960. Does this confirm that Legends Unova has to take place after the 60s? No. I know this is a stretch, but it's the closest I've got. I mean, Mr. Mime is technically a 2-stager by the time Gen 5 was out. And again, the goal here is to make a fun list of ideas. So I'm adding a humanoid element to the list. Also, some people get really wound up on matching types, and like, there are several obvious parallels here where the types don't match up. So like the symbiosis with the Shellmons, these pairs of single stagers interact with each other in some way. Pinsir and Scyther were mentioned to be rivals, even though this dynamic would shift in the second generation, while Heatmor and Durant are predator and prey. This is different from the rivalry from before where the two lines are more equal, but it's a relationship between two different lines of designs nonetheless. So, I've been talking a lot, haven't I? You see, when I was organizing these pairs for the third time, I wasn't going in order. I was just doing the most obvious ones first, then fitting the rest. But even then, I'll eventually have some leftovers. Golok and Bishop were amongst them, and I mentioned how shaky I am with those pairings. I mean, I know I can't find a one-to-one for every mon, and I'm just trying to do my best for fun here. But when I was about to give up on this video for a third time, I then found something that made me feel like I was onto something. Jinx, Electabuzz, and Magmar are not a trio according to their base stats, but they are all single-stage yokai with the types Ice, Electric, and Fire. The same types as the Kanto legendaries Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, and in the same order as well. Pokemon was greedy, taking both light and art primary colors, since their legendaries here are clearly based off of blue, yellow, and red, which are the same type effects one will find in Tri-Attack, and also the same colors of the evolutions. Okay, Vaporeon was an ice type, but Ice, Electric, then Fire was what remained. And the 3 triple-stage Unovan Pokemon I saw were Vanillux, Electros, and Chandelure. I'm not denying that Vanillux and Chandelure may have some elements from other Gen 1 mons, but here they fit the puzzle unlike anyone else. But wait, Jinx, Electabuzz, and Magmar are single-stagers. Until Gen 2, when they all got babies, and then in Gen 4, where Electabuzz and Magmar got new item-requiring trait evolutions, admittedly leaving Jinx behind for Rhyperior. And somehow, we see the same story with the Unovans, where Chandelure and Electros require stones to evolve, while Vanillux doesn't. Coincidence? I think maybe. For specifically Vanillux, all we know is that designer James Turner was tasked to make an ice type with multiple bodies. And although this line got some flack when fans learned that an Englishman was behind it, fortunately, time would prove to show how skilled of a designer James Turner is, as he's getting the recognitions that's much overdue, not only for his designs, but also for his own game The Plucky Squire, which is available on Steam and various other platforms. Now this is obvious. Now that regionals exist where the same species gains a new form just by being in a new location, some wanted to call Buffalant a regional Tauros, and personally, I think it's just how rigid the bovine body plan is. They'll all probably look similar unless they're forced to be bipedal like Miltank or Otis.
Once there was an ugly barnacle.
Alright, we're almost done here. So the true Magikarp pair, in my opinion, is going to Volcarona. Volcarona kind of borrows a lot from Arcanine's lore, where they were mistaken to be a legendary, with Volcarona having their own dedicated shrine. But mechanically, they are one of the hardest Pokemon to evolve in the whole franchise, second only to the Unovan powerhouse. This is more equatable to Magikarp's challenge of barely attacking. It's an element about getting over a hard challenge to be rewarded with a cool evolution, an element that the powerhouses also share. Alomomola isn't the only Pokemon you could surf with in Gen 5, but they are a helpful supporter. And Lapras isn't really a support in the game, but they do support people narratively. I wanted to say that this is about fishing up a rare Pokemon or something, but neither are really tied to the fishing mechanics in their respective games. So my next best guess is that they can learn the Surf HM to let the player progress certain areas. They're just thick, single-staged aquatics. Also, whilst drawing the Unova Pokemon, I noticed how a lot of them have this heart motif going on. Huh. So Ditto has a unique gimmick, right? With the ability to transform into anyone. And Zoroark also has a shape-shifting gimmick, only here, they're merely copying the appearance. Now note that Zoroark is probably closer to a trope that started after Gen 1, which is the anthropomorphic movie hero character. It's just pretty funny how Zoroark's gimmick lines up with Ditto's, which, fun fact, Ditto couldn't immediately transform until Generation 5, which was when they gave Ditto their signature hidden ability. Before that, Ditto would need to survive a turn to copy the opponent. People love sets, a set of cards, a set of symbols, so the Evolution set would prove to be one of the most beloved Pokemon of the whole franchise. So how would the Unovan Counterpart compare? By making one of the least loved Pokemon in the whole franchise. Not most hated, mind you, just ones with the least attention. These monkeys were stated to be made for the first gym, but unlike Eevee introducing a choice for the player between the evolution, a monkey was given to you depending on your starter's type. Also, as a quick tangent, I know that the monkeys were supposed to be see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, but only one of them is following that. I don't know, these monkeys aren't my cup of tea either. This may not be intentional, but Porygon is polygonal and Cryogonal is polygonal. It's a match made in heaven. Kinda wanna see a Cryogonal 2 and a Cryogonal Z, even though that kinda doesn't make sense in the context of a snowflake. I'm old! Pokemon often brings out some prehistoric references with their fossils. I have an old video dedicated to them, and today I'll just mention how odd it is that the fossils of these generations share the same typings. Like, I do get it, it's a sea versus sky comparison, but it's still rather convenient to see how the types match up.
In life you have roadblocks.
Is this Crustle again? So while Snorlax was based off of designer Koji Nishino, they do offer a special mechanic within the story of the games. They are a roadblock. Roadblock Pokemon don't exist every generation, but for Unova, there was Crustle. Kinda. From what I've seen, Crustle was only an obstacle in Black 2 White 2. I mean, they looked like they were built for some block pushing puzzles, but yeah, weirdly, I don't think they were initially obstacles in Black and White. Wait, let's go over one more comparison before this. I got a whole video on this. It's a 600 base statter to rival the very gods of this universe, and they're achieved after a rather arduous grind. The only other Pokemon that have exactly 600 stat points would be the Mythicals, and Gen 9's Archaludon. So is Archaludon a pseudo-legendary powerhouse? I would say no, because it doesn't follow the journey part of the trope. But whilst this is a trope Pokemon has held throughout their generations, Pokemon does like to mix up their own formulae from time to time. Here we are, at the end. You and your team have grown so much through this story, but are you strong enough to face the strongest species of these lands? The final challenge of you as a collector before you complete all of what this game has to offer. In Kanto, there was one set of legendary birds, and one additional secret legendary. Well, I guess they're all kind of hidden. However, starting from the very next games, these strong legendaries would be used to advertise the games themselves, often playing the bigger role in the narrative. Black and White would have 2 trios of legendaries and a duo of box legendaries that was later expanded to a trio of their own in the sequel games. Kinda suspicious how they're ice, electric, and fire types. Anyways, not only do we see a growing number of these special Pokemon in the roster, but there's also a lot of forms associated with them too. There's probably some recession in the case. I'm just kidding. Let's finally wrap this up. And with that, I think we've ended up with quite a fun list. Stick around till the end for an overview. Again, this is just my interpretation of shared character elements between generations 1 and 5. Most of these are not tropes that Pokemon adhere to for every generation, and some intergenerational tropes weren't really mentioned here either. So please don't act as if these are hard set rules. Gen 5 was marked as the rebirth of the franchise, and even though Pokemon would only learn to never abandon their older designs, the redirection of making Pokemon represent a geographical area's culture and species has done wonders to inspire so many other artists to make regions of their own. So, were there any pairs here you would have done differently? Comment below! If you like my kind of analysis here today, follow the channel and you can watch this playlist of videos where I've been making discussions on designs and game development. Thank you to my Patreon supporters for directly supporting me and my projects in these times, and thank you for watching till the end of this very long video. Alright, let's roll the overview. Alright, this is my take between the elements shared between Gens 1 and 5. Some mons might appear in multiple slots, but I'll leave them in the area that I find most fitting. Your first partner. 3-stage bugs. 3-stage bird. Small mammal. Antagonistic bird? Grunt fodder. Pika clones. An early ground type, often also used by grunts. Gender counterpart lines. A cutie patootie. Fire type spirit. A second cutie patootie? And additionally, a line that shows off a specific game mechanic. Bat. Grass 1. Physical bug. Special bug. Mole. Cat. Duck. 2-stage fighters. Dog. Frog. Brain. Brawn. Grass 2. Non-fish aquatic. Rock. Horse. Shell adopter. Inorganic steel type. Single stage flyer. Multi-header. Ice. Slime. Shell. Orb. First gym boss. Dream eater. Crab. Mimic. Seed. Spooky. Fighting duo. Silly. Pollution. Cool. Healer. Funny plant. Tough single stage. Pseudo. Fish. Alien. Humanoid. Rival 1. A line of ice, electric, and fire types. Often with electric and fire sharing more similarities. Rival 2. Bovine. Be careful who you call ugly in middle school. Chunky water type. Shapeshifter. A set of related designs. Polygonal. Fossils. Obstacle. Set of legendaries. Pseudo-legendary. Box legendary, though Mewtwo doesn't really fit that label. And mythicals. So what do you think? Is this a fun list, or did I just force it down mid? Tell me down below. Till next time, have a nice one.